Just tell me where to go, the small voice whispered. It was the first day of autumn break, but the air in the long, fluorescent hallway of Northwood Elementary felt heavy, like wet concrete. A girl, no older than 8, stood frozen just inside the entrance. Her name, they would later learn, was Alara. She was tiny, a flash of worn red traditional dress against the drab, beige wall, her long, dark braids damp with a mix of mist and tears. She was clearly indigenous, a sight jarringly out of place in this mostly white, suburban public school. A gasp was ripped from her small chest, a sound that held the weight of a silent scream. Her eyes, wide and obsidian, scanned the empty lockers and shut classroom doors, the frantic searchlight of an animal caught in a trap. Clutching a canvas drawstring bag to her chest like a lifeline, she didn't just look lost, she looked hunted. The school principal, a man named Mr. Harrison, a gentle giant of a man with a perpetually tired face, rounded the corner. He stopped dead. The sight of a child alone, crying, was common. The sight of this child, here, in this way, was not. The silence between them was thick, broken only by a single, heart-shattering sob that escaped Alara. Mr. Harrison crouched down, his expensive tie drooping slightly, dissolving the professional barrier. He spoke softly, but the girl flinched, pulling her bag tighter. 2 janitors, Maria and Hector, who had been mopping the floor in a far wing, exchanged a glance and silently drifted closer, their usual boisterous banter silenced. They were not police, they were just working-class people, their faces etched with a weary concern that only those who have struggled truly understand. The environment was antiseptic, orderly, and fundamentally safe, but the girl's terror painted the scene with a primal savagery. It was the stark contrast, the innocence of a crying child against the invisible, menacing darkness she carried, that froze them. Mr. Harrison tried again, a simple, non-threatening question. "What's your name, honey? Are you hurt?" She didn't answer. Her small body was shaking, not from cold, but from an internal tremor. It was then that Maria noticed it, a small, dark bruise blooming just below Alara's delicate jawline, a silent, sickening stain on her otherwise flawless skin. The simple act of her being here, alone, was becoming less a case of a lost child and more a sign of a profound breach in the world's fragile order. Maria, who knew how to speak without sounding like authority, knelt lower than the principal, speaking a few soft words in Spanish, a language Alara didn't understand, but whose tone was universal. Alara finally spoke, her voice a reedy, trembling thing. They told me to run," she whispered, her eyes darting to the school's front windows as if expecting a shadow to fall. "The old woman. She said to find a safe place before the blue trucks came." Blue trucks. This was not a lost and found scenario. Mr. Harrison felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He gently touched her canvas bag. "What do you have here, Alara? Is it important?" Her grip slackened slightly, a moment of profound, exhausting surrender. Slowly, painstakingly, she pulled the drawstring open. It wasn't full of toys or books or a forgotten lunch. It was filled with nothing but soil. Rich, dark, aromatic earth. And nestled in the center, wrapped in a faded piece of cloth, was a single, smooth, obsidian river stone. Maria gasped. Hector shook his head slowly. The contents were not proof of violence, but proof of flight. A child, in her deepest terror, had chosen to carry the ground she belonged to. It was a gesture of such heartbreaking, symbolic gravity that it instantly transformed the situation from a routine missing person case into a desperate saga of cultural and personal survival. The atmosphere, already thick, turned sharp and metallic. Alara's frantic gaze fixed on a black SUV that slowly cruised past the school's front entrance, then, ominously, turned around and parked 2 blocks down. "The men in the big cars," she breathed, her small hands covering her mouth. "They take the children." Mr. Harrison instantly moved from cautious inquiry to protective action. He pushed a button on his desk phone under the pretext of checking his email, silently activating the school's interior security lockdown. This wasn't local police or truancy officers. Alara's sheer, instinctual terror suggested something far more predatory. The blue trucks and men in big cars smelled of private security, perhaps, or something related to a corrupt land dispute back on her ancestral reservation. The weight of her bag, the simple soil, was suddenly the weight of evidence of a heritage being violently suppressed. Maria and Hector stood guard at the hallway entrance, their expressions hardened into a fierce, unspoken resolve. Mr. Harrison met their eyes. They had a split second to make a decision that would risk their jobs, maybe more. He didn't even have to ask. "We call the police," he muttered, "but we don't tell them she's here. Not yet. We need a moment to understand what we're protecting her from." The threat was not a distant cloud, it was a tightening fist. The black SUV sat waiting. The silence in the hallway was now a roaring siren of imminent danger. The confrontation arrived not with a crash, but with a calculated, chilling phone call. The school line rang. An unlisted number. Mr. Harrison answered, his voice steady. A man with a flat, bureaucratic tone, heavy with false authority, stated he was from a tribal welfare agency and that a child matching Alara's description was in breach of custody protocol. He demanded immediate access to the premises. "I am legally obligated to refuse," Mr. Harrison stated, every muscle tense. "You must present a warrant." The man's voice dropped, shedding its pretense of legality. "Listen, Principal. That girl is tied up in a messy lawsuit over tribal water rights. She's evidence. We just need to collect the evidence and you get to keep your nice, quiet job." The threat hung in the air, cold, corporate violence. Maria and Hector, listening in, instinctively positioned themselves closer to Alara, their faces shields. That's when Alara moved. She didn't cry or hide. She walked to Mr. Harrison's desk, picked up the phone, and held it to her ear. Her tiny voice, miraculously steady, cut through the line. "You can't have the dirt," she said, her voice echoing the fierce defiance of generations. "My grandmother said the dirt remembers everything." She didn't wait for a response, she slammed the receiver down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Her act wasn't just courage, it was a declaration of war by a child who understood that the soil in her bag was not just from the land, but was the land itself. The man on the other end, stunned by the sheer audacity, was silent. For now, the threat was neutralized, not by force, but by the weight of a child's truth. The silence that followed was heavy with the smell of ozone, the residue of a near miss. The black SUV, having lost its immediate advantage, drove away, melting back into the ordinary street traffic, but its retreat felt temporary, a strategic withdrawal. Alara was safe, for the moment, encased in the impromptu, fierce protection of the three strangers. Mr. Harrison finally called the authorities, not the local police, but a specific, trusted contact at the FBI's Tribal Liaison Office, weaving a careful narrative that emphasized the welfare concern and the unauthorized, threatening intervention. The wheels of bureaucracy, slow and grinding, had begun to turn in her favor. But the immediate crisis was replaced by a more profound, existential one, and now, where does she go? She couldn't go back to the reservation, the danger there was acute and institutional. She couldn't be placed in the state foster care system, it was too easily traceable, too often a conduit to the very system that failed her. Her three protectors, a suburban principal, and two immigrant janitors, stood in a small, anxious circle around her. Alara, now calm but utterly exhausted, finally fell asleep, her head resting on her bag of soil, the obsidian stone pressed into her palm. The victory was hollow. They had saved her from the men, but not from the vastness of her loss. The next 3 months were an unlikely, profoundly moving tableau of accidental family. Mr. Harrison, legally her temporary guardian, moved Alara into his quiet, organized home. His wife, a retired nurse named Carol, stepped into the role of caregiver with a maternal fierce determination, navigating the complex world of Indigenous trauma with patient, gentle love. Maria and Hector became the steady, visiting aunt and uncle, bringing her handmade tortillas and teaching her simple card games that transcended language barriers. The principal's house, once a monument to middle-class order, was transformed. Alara, initially withdrawn, began to bloom. The group learned about her people through her, the quiet reverence for nature, the stories woven into the dirt she still kept on the windowsill. Carol found simple, bright dresses that replaced the worn traditional clothing, and Alara was enrolled in the school, attending classes with a quiet, fierce dedication. There were small, daily dramas. Alara would wake in the night, a silent scream caught in her throat, and Carol would simply hold her, humming. Mr. Harrison, a man used to managing budgets and staff, found himself learning to braid hair and, most surprisingly, to listen to a silence that spoke volumes. The group didn't just care for Alara, they cared with her. Their collective, improbable love acting as the antidote to the cold, impersonal forces that had tried to erase her. They were no longer three strangers and a lost child, they were a hastily constructed, deeply bonded clan of the unexpected. The idyllic, fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of the system. The FBI investigation had led to the arrest of several figures involved in the corrupt tribal land scheme, but Alara's custody remained contested. The court-appointed social worker, a sharp, skeptical woman named Ms. Thorne, visited the Harrison home. She was deeply uncomfortable with the optics, a white, privileged principal, who was also the child's rescuer, seeking permanent custody of an Indigenous child. The moral debate in the judge's chambers was intense and cutting. Ms. Thorne argued that Alara belonged within her cultural context, not with people who could only offer a well-meaning, but superficial, understanding. The defense argued that the child's safety, stability, and demonstrable love outweighed rigid cultural placement, especially since the tribe itself was fractured by the corruption. The courtroom was packed. Maria and Hector sat silently in the back, the embodiment of the dangerous community that had unexpectedly wrapped Alara in true love. The tension in the room was crushing, the decision hinging on a moral razor's edge. Finally, the judge called a recess. When the session resumed, the only person he addressed was the smallest one in the room. He asked Alara, gently, to explain what she carried in her bag the day she arrived, and what it meant. Alara stood, diminutive but utterly composed. She didn't speak of fear or loss, she spoke of connection. "The stone is from the river," she said, her voice clear. "It has the sound of my people's water." "The dirt," she paused, looking at Mr. Harrison and Carol, then back at Maria and Hector, "the dirt is my home. But the water has to flow. The man who tried to take me, he wanted to stop the water. Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Carol, they are the banks of the river now. They help the water flow, so I can go to school and remember my people." Her simple, profound metaphor was the decisive testimony. She hadn't chosen one culture over another, she had chosen safety and love. The judge, visibly moved by her articulation of a complex, legal conflict through the pure language of nature, made his ruling swiftly. The custody was granted to the Harrisons, with provisions for Maria and Hector to remain as critical cultural and support figures. The group, the clan of the unexpected, had won. The courtroom erupted in a quiet catharsis of relief and joy. Alara, now officially a part of this non-conventional family, smiled. It wasn't the tentative smile of a child who had endured, but the full, brilliant grin of a child who had been found. For years later, the scene is a bustling community center near the old school. Alara is 12, tall, articulate, and fiercely bright. Her braids still hang long, now interwoven with tiny, colorful beads. The bag of soil sits not forgotten, but as the centerpiece of a small, glass-covered exhibit in the center's lobby. The building itself is the genesis of a new non-profit organization, founded by the Harrisons, Maria, and Hector, called the Flowing River Project. Its mission, to provide safe, culturally sensitive transitional homes and legal advocacy for Indigenous children caught in land and custody disputes. Mr. Harrison is no longer a principal, he runs the project full-time, his perpetually tired eyes now alight with purpose. Maria and Hector manage the community outreach, their life experience the bedrock of the program's empathy. Alara, a thriving middle schooler, often speaks to the newly arrived children, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding. Her story, which began with a desperate flight and a bag of dirt, has become a powerful magnet for justice and hope. She has learned that the fear she once carried has been transmuted into a foundation. The obsidian stone is now polished smooth, still on her person, but no longer a mere symbol of survival, it's a constant reminder of the unbreakable link between the land, the truth, and the love that holds it all together. The final, resonant lesson, etched into the cornerstone of their new building, is Alara's own powerful statement, the quiet motto of their entire movement: when you carry your home, you never truly leave.